morning.
Good morning.
Say it again. We did have a beautiful breakfast this morning.
Yes, sir.
Baby, grits.
Yeah.
Fried tip.
Yeah.
And turkey.
And
If you're still hungry, shame on you.
That's right.
You had a good shot. Yeah. I think Brother James did the turkey and he did the fried tip.
Yeah.
I can smell that smoke, brother.
Is it getting you hungry again, Pastor?
Huh?
I said, is it getting you hungry again?
No, I'm not hungry anymore.
Yes. On the 19th, he will be here.
Our lesson
Yeah.
is found in Deuteronomy chapter 5,
Yeah,
verse 1
we need
through 3.
something
And Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12
We
through
need to-
13. And found in Deuteronomy 27, verses
You
1
need to be here,
through
thanks.
10. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on the first Sunday in December. Realizing all this folly out there, a lot of those who you blessed to be here. We thank you for them coming to the Father. We thank you, Lord, for the devotion committee and those who took care of us with the food. Bless us now and look at your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
When we look at our lesson, topic is justice and obedience. And this is Moses writing to Israel, getting them ready to go into the promised land. Now we know that Moses never made it over.
Right, sir.
But God placed him in the position that since he was the one that God called, is to lay out a formula. That's what it's called, a formula. And he's talking to the first generation all died
Right.
in the desert.
Right.
This is the new generation that came up, and you're getting them prepared to go into the land of Canaan. And so we find in our lesson, he says, "Hear, O Israel." Listen, he's saying, listen to what I got to say, because it will be very important
Right.
before you go into the land of Canaan that need to be obedient. So I'm going to lay out the guidelines for you. Just like here in the state of California, before you get your license, you have a book.
Right.
That you got to read, right?
Right.
Now when you read it, once you read it and get an understanding, then you're able to take for the test,
Right.
and then you'll be able to get your license. So here he says, this indicates these are decrees of the law. And that's Deuteronomy chapter 4 and 45. He said it's necessary for your survival. That's what he's saying. This is necessary for your survival.
That's right, sir.
Because when you go over there and you're very disobedient, God is going to whip you.
That's right.
So he said, when Moses said that our Lord, our God, made a covenant with us on the Mount of Horeb. That's where the covenant was first made, was up there on the mountain. Everything seemed like everything God did, he did on the mountaintop.
Yes. Right.
He said, not with our fathers, but he's talking about with your fathers, he said. He was teaching the Israelites that this covenant was meant to govern their living and not the dead. You who are living and not the dead. Moses had the right to say this because he was the mediator of the covenant. And sometimes when you go to court, a person will get a divorce. Before you go before the judge, they have what they call a mediator. Right. Someone hoping that man and woman can come together. They're going to have to go before the judge.
Right.
So here in this lesson, he is the mediator of the covenant. The Lord spoke with Israel face to face from the mountain of Sinai.
Yeah.
Remember Israel talking about, man, we don't want to hear you, Moses.
Yeah.
We want to hear from God.
Right.
And God came down off that mountain.
Yeah.
We don't know what he said. But whatever he said, we said, we'll hear you, Moses.
Yes, sir.
Some say he just called. And they said, no, we hear you, Moses. You talk to us, we don't want to talk to God anymore. So we find here that was in Exodus chapter 19 and 9, when Moses was writing, when he went up there on the mountain on Sinai. Before they left Sinai, they actually went around, all they did was go around in circles. They weren't too far from Sinai, they was in the desert, but they went around in circles. And so when God got ready to give the law and decree to Moses, we know that Moses went up on the mountain. Up there, and God spoke to him. While he was on the mountain, he laid out the guideline for Israel in order that they might go across. So we also find that in our text, the covenant was to be renewed not only by writing the law. That's chapter 27. But in chapter 5 and chapter 10, it says these verses are an introductory summary to a general exhortation. You say, having shown the impossibility of self-dependence. Moses had called Israel to exercise the option for survival and total commitment to the Lord. We want to have a total commitment. We know when they was out there, in the wilderness the first time, they didn't have a total commitment. And the reason they have a total commitment because when the spies came back and gave a report, 10 gave the right report. 2 gave the right report and 10 gave the wrong report. So these are infinitives used for fear, which is 4 and 10. We say, what I want you to do, I want you to walk, love, serve, and observe. Such commitment was for your own good, and it will go well with you if you do what I ask you to do. That's 12 through 13. He said, now Israel, what does the Lord thy God require of thee? But to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. And he realized that when he was going, into the promised land, that there were people who served other gods. And he wanted to make sure that they served the true and living God, because if they left out not serving him, God had things that he would do to Israel. And so when we look at the 27th chapter, verses 1 through 10, and Moses with the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all thy commandments, which I command you this day. And it shall be on the day when you pass over the Jordan, unto the land which the Lord thy God has given thee. God gave them that land. That thou shalt set these great stones, plaster with them with plaster. In those days, it was like plaster of your wall. He said, these stones, they could see what was going on there. And he said, and thou shalt write upon them all the words of this law. And when thou pass over, that thou may go unto the land which the Lord thy God has given thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord of thy father had promised. God had promised that a long time ago. So he keep his promise. Therefore it shall be when he has gone over the Jordan, that he shall set up these stones. Once they get across the Jordan, these are markers that they had to set up, which I command you this day in Mount Ebal. There's another mountain, Mount Ebal, I command you. And thou shalt plaster them with plaster. And thou shalt build an altar unto the Lord thy God, an altar of stone, and thou shalt not lift any iron tool on them. Israel didn't have no iron tools there. They had spoiled with no iron tools. And thou shalt build the altar of the Lord thy God of whole stone, and thou shalt offer burnt offering thereon unto the Lord thy God, and thou shalt offer peace offering, and shalt eat there, and rejoice before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt write upon the stones all the words of this law very plainly, so that you may be able to see it. And Moses and the priests and the Levites spake unto Israel, saying, Take heed, and hearken, O Israel, this day, thou art before the God of thy Lord thy God. And he said, Thou shalt therefore obey the voice of the Lord thy God, and do his commandments and his statutes, which I commanded thee. So this reference, these elders, are reference to Moses and the elders, right? He emphasized they were the one who was in leadership. All right. And he renewed this covenant again. It's a ceremony when the nation entered the promised land. Moses would no longer be there to guide them. And we know that Joshua, was the one that took them over to the promised land because what Moses did, Moses disobeyed God. And God told Moses, said, guess what? I'll allow you to look over, but you never get over it. No. The writing on a large stone was coated with plaster, which was common in Egypt. This was something they knew. It was common in Egypt. You know, it was in Egypt there, and they were building all these statues. This was something that they knew about. The meaning of the phrase, all the words of the law, this is uncertain, but in the light of Egyptian customs, it refers to the entire book of Deuteronomy rather than part of the book, the whole book. This is what you're going to follow. This is what you're going to have to read. And that's why we sit down with our young folk. We need to make sure that they read the whole book, from Genesis to Revelation, not just half the book. Sometimes some denominations got started by different parts of the book. That's right, sir. Not the whole book. They took part of it out that they want to use for themselves. But he says the whole book. I'm giving you that this might be a roadmap, might be a guide, that when you get over to the new promised land, where there are heathens who serve their God, I want to make sure that you serve the true and living God. Amen. The significance of this act was twofold. First, it commemorated God's faithfulness in giving them the land just as the Lord thy God of your fathers promised you. God was faithful. He made a promise way back to Abraham that they were going that land. And so he said, guess what? I want you to keep the promise that I gave to your forefathers. God of your father, this occurs 6 times in the book of Deuteronomy. The stones were set up on Ebal about 35 miles north of Jerusalem. This mountain was 35 miles north of Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem at that time was not the capital of Israel. The Jebusites were up there. And Jerusalem wasn't captured until David got on the throne. But no, it said, at the base which he laid the city of Shem. This was at Shem. This is where the altar was left before he got to Jerusalem. It was at Shem that the Lord first appeared to Abraham. That city, he first appeared to Abraham. And there Abraham built his first altar to the Lord, which is Genesis 12 and 6 and 7. So Abraham built an altar there before Israel was a nation. The choice of this location emphasized God's faithfulness to the original Abraham promise, and hint that the time of their complete fulfillment might be near if only Israel would obey him. The second writing of the law when they entered the promised land was symbolic of the nation's mission to bring Canaan under the dominance of the word of God. God's word ought to be dominant in all our lives. That's right, sir. In all our lives. So he lays out this roadmap to Israel to let them know what will happen. And he said, thou shalt write thy words, and put them in stone, set out, that they might see what is going on. This is a commitment that he lays out to Israel. He said, thou shalt write the words of this law when thou pass over, and thou mayest go unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, a land that flows with milk and honey. Guess what? They're going to a beautiful land. Yes, sir. It said flowing with what? Milk and honey. Yeah. Everything you need is going to be there when you get there. Yes, sir. That's good to know. And the Lord of thy fathers has promised thee. It's like when God makes a promise, God will not go back on his promise. Jesus made a promise that he's going to come back, right?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Remember when he got ready to step in that king on that cloud, and he looked up, and the disciples looked up, and he said, look, man, the same way he came.
Yeah, that's the same way.
It's the same way he's coming back.
Yes, sir.
And then Paul gave a promise too. He said, when the trumpet sound, the dead in Christ will rise.
That's it.
He said, you'll see him coming in a cloud. He left in a cloud, guess what? He's coming back in a cloud.
Yes, sir.
He said, therefore, when ye have gone over Jerusalem, and ye shall set these stones. Now, you know, sometimes when you drive down the highway, you got these road signs, right? You got speed signs too. And sometimes when you're coming down, once you leave White Lane coming down, heading north, they got a flicker out there to tell you how fast you're going.
Right.
First it says 55.
That's right.
If you go past 55, guess what happens? It shows your speed.
Yes, right.
Am I right? If the man stops you, you don't have no excuse. You say, guess what? I saw 55, you went 65. What he's saying here is these stones going to be where you can read them. And it's plain that you may have an understanding when you get over into the promised land.
Right.
He said, in Mount Ebal thou shalt place them again, and there thou shalt build an altar unto the Lord thy God, an altar of stone.
Yeah.
They would follow the same thing that Moses did.
Right.
Moses built an altar to God. He killed something later because God blessed him to come back.
Right, sir.
To where Shem was.
Right, sir.
And thou shalt not lift any iron tool upon it. It's hard to understand. How can you take these stones and not lift no iron tool? God had a way of doing this thing. But guess what? That's what I want you to do. You know when he built the temple, he gave certain rules to Solomon.
That's it.
He said there's certain instruments you can't use in building this temple.
That's right. That's right.
He said, thou shalt build an altar, the Lord thy God, of whole stone, and thou shalt offer a burnt offering thereof unto the Lord thy God. Because he realized that when he went over to the promised land, there were other altars over there. There were other nations who all to their God.
Right, right.
You know, in those days, sometimes they would take their children. The peas they got.
Right.
Am I right about that? He told the Israelites, now when you go there, you can't do your children like they did.
That's right.
Because there's a lot of things they're doing that you cannot do, and that's why I'm putting this book, the Deuteronomy, before you. He said, thou shalt offer a peace offering.
Yeah.
And that eat there. Once you get there, you eat it. A peace offering. And then not only that, he said, rejoice before the Lord thy God. Get over there. Rejoice.
Rejoice, man.
When God blesses us, we ought to rejoice.
Amen, sir.
Amen. We ought to rejoice.
Amen.
He said, in verse 8 says, and thou shalt write upon a stone all the words of this law very plain. Now, you know, when I started in school, we had a book called Dick and Jane. Y'all remember that?
Yeah.
Y'all remember Dick and Jane?
Yeah.
Dick and Jane was easy reading, right?
Yes, sir.
It was very plain, you know. These kids don't know what Dick and Jane is. Y'all had a Dick and Jane.
Yeah.
That's how you learn how to read.
That's right.
We call it a primer
Right.
book. But that's how you see when you get there, write it plain. Not only for the elders to see it, but the children themselves might be able to read. You know, nowadays, we got Bibles nowadays. We got the English Bible. We got the New American Standard. Then you got other. We got the Word of God. Some of these Bibles are very plain because some folk it's hard for them to read the King James Version or the King's English. But they all say the same thing. But it's where it's plain, where even children can sit down and read the book. He said, and Moses and the priests, the Levites, spake unto all Israel. Now notice they had the priests, and they had the Levites. You know who the first priest. Aaron was the first priest and his sons. But Aaron didn't make it over to the promised land, but his sons carried it on. Right? And they had the Levites. The Levites were the ones who were going to take care of the temple. They were the one that run the temple. They were the one that made the sacrifice. They were the one that put everything together. So what God was doing, he was getting everything ready, that when it got over into the promised land, all the officers were in place.
Amen.
He said, no, he said, take heed. Other word, I'm warning you, take heed.
Right.
Hold on to it. You know, sometimes we tell our children when you go somewhere, you know, be careful.
Right.
You know, take heed, and then not only take heed, but hearken to it.
That's it.
See, you can heed a whole lot of things.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't hearken to what's there, guess what? You're going to find yourself in a bad situation.
That's right, sir.
See, take heed and hearken to what I'm writing to you. O Israel,
Yeah.
he said, and then goes on, this day, not tomorrow, but the day that I'm speaking to you, I want you to take heed right now.
Right.
He said, and thou art become the people, notice he says, the people of the Lord thy God, because they were going into a land where there were other people. He was setting Israel. Israel was going to be a special people.
Right.
They was going to be the ones that when they went over into the promised land to be an example to the people who were over there.
Yeah.
Jesus said we are the light.
Right.
He said Paul said we are what peculiar people.
That's right. That's it.
Israel were very peculiar. God said, now I'm forming a nation that I promised Abraham that your children shall be like the seashore,
That's right.
the stars,
That's right.
a great nation.
That's it.
It took God 400 years to put Israel together.
Yes, sir.
But once he got them together, he laid the foundation
Right.
that when you get over there. Now sometimes, you know, on our cars now we got the guidance system now, you know. You tell yourself, well, I want to go to Mount Zion. It'll tell you how many miles Mount Zion, it'll tell you how to get there, tell you what direction to get. But sometimes, guess what? It'll lead you in the wrong direction.
That's right. That's right.
But God said, I'm not leading you in the wrong direction. I'll try and get the liberty backwards one time. I know what liberty backwards was. I went down Calhoun. And then when they sent me in another direction, I said, hold it now. I know liberty. It's only 2 blocks over. But they sent me 3 blocks the other way.
Oh, my.
He said, become the people of the Lord thy God. He was putting emphasis on that the Lord thy God. I'm the one who brought you over here. I'm the one I want you to remember. I want you to remember who I am.
Right.
And he says, verse 10 says, and thou shalt therefore obey the voice of the Lord thy God. Obey his voice.
Right.
You know, sometimes when these kids coming up, you know, you can tell one mother's voice from another's voice. You know, you walk down the street and somebody calls you and say, Johnny!
Right.
You know who's calling you.
That's
because
right.
your mother has maybe a little different voice than Mary's voice.
Right.
So God had the voice. He had already spoken to them through Moses. And he said, do this commandments and his statute. Now we know he gave the 10 commandments. The statute was the guidelines.
That's right.
In those days, he would tell them you can't eat catfish.
All right. Praise the Lord.
Can't eat no pork. You know, certain foods you can eat, and certain foods you could not eat. God gave them a certain diet.
Right, sir.
Of Israel, a certain diet, because he knows that when they went into the promised land, there were other people that had their own diets.
Right.
But they had a certain diet that they had to go by. Now, we look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Seventh-day Adventist Church used a lot of Deuteronomy.
Right.
Because they used the diets that was laid out in the book of Deuteronomy. But then, you know, remember when Peter went on that housetop? You know, he seen all these animals come down?
Right.
See, these are clean animals. I can't eat that. God told us,
What I clean, who you call unclean.
Unclean.
Yes.
But he's talking about the Gentiles.
Right, sir.
Because he's getting ready to send Peter to the Gentiles. In those days, the Gentiles were considered unclean.
Right, sir.
So he's getting his mind ready because he knew that Peter was a bigot.
Okay.
Yeah, Peter was a bigot. He's very big.
Yes,
To
sir.
prove my point, remember when in Antioch? Peter had been there for a long time, sat out there with them, Antioch people, church there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the big shots come from Jerusalem. You know, and Paul was there also. And Peter separated himself
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
with the other church. And Paul condemned him. So now you've been here all this time.
Yeah.
The big shots come, you want to separate yourself?
Yeah.
He called him out plainly.
Yes, sir.
He called him by his tongue.
All right.
You Peter. Because he knew Peter was the one who was the pillar of the early church.
Right, sir.
He says that, and his statute, which I command thee this day. He laid it out, point blank. These are the statutes. We have statutes of law here in America, right? And some statutes here in America is obsolete. Remember when those three boys there, me in Atlanta, was being tried? They tried to go back to a statute of the during the Civil War. Right. But it had been what? Repealed. All right. Now certain laws here in America had to be repealed, right, because they went against what was going on today. But these statutes that God put in place could not be repealed by Israel. Right. He laid it out. In the book of, so you read it. Some people don't like to read the book of Deuteronomy because it seems like it goes over and over. It repeats itself over and over again.
That's right. Like they wrote stone.
Right, right. So it goes over and over. Sometimes you know what they call it rote. If you want to memorize something, you what? You go with over and over and over until you get it. And so that's what we tell the Israelites. I want to make sure that when you pass by, that you're going to see these stones that have been set out. Remember when Israel crossed the Jordan, he told the Levites, pick up those stones, and when you get to the other side, place them. There was certain place them right there on the other side. And then he allowed the nation to go over. But there were stones that he set up, that they might read these signs. They're like how you say, symbols of road signs. And so he said, justice and obedience. You can have justice, but if you don't obey, guess what? You're going to pay the penalty. That's right. And we know that when Israel got over there, they followed these statutes as long as Joshua and the elders were alive. Right. But the Bible says, when a new generation came up, that wasn't under Joshua and the elders. Right. And guess what? They went against these statutes. And the Bible has said every 40 years Israel was put into bondage. Because what? They left the law of God. And they kept doing it over and over and over again. Right?
Didn't God tell them when they were going over on the other side, whenever you get over there, if you don't do it, it's going to kill everybody, right?
Right.
And that if you don't, there's going to be some repercussions.
Repercussions.
There will be repercussions behind it.
Right.
Because they didn't do what God told them to do.
That's right. And because they didn't do what God told them, they suffered.
Yeah, they did.
Remember when they got Jericho, God said, now Jericho is my city. That's what he said? I'm the one going to take Jericho. But there was one man took some gold and silver from Jericho. Right. And when Israel went into the next battle, the Bible said, and they lost. And Joshua said, holy man, what's wrong here? He said, there's sin in the camp.
That's it. That's what he said.
Because guess what? They didn't obey because that's my city.
That's it. So.
He also laid out in history that Jericho should have never been built. All right, now. Because it was a cursed city. And the first person that brought Jericho up, he died. Because he said, that's my city. Right. Consequence. Right. Consequences. Right. And because what happened when they came back, Joshua made all those tribes line up. And they did a census. Because he wanted to know where that gold and silver was. And when it got to that one man, not only did he kill him, but he killed all his family. Because guess what? They had disobeyed God. And you ask yourself, why the whole family? There's consequences. Why the whole family? God want to root out evil. Absolutely. And sometimes the only way God can root out evil, guess what he does? He kills everybody. Yes, sir. Am I right about it? Yes, sir. He told Moses, when Israel got upset, and he told Moses, I'll build up another nation. That's what he said. That was obey me. And Moses interceded for Israel. He said, what are those other nations going to say that you brought us this far and keep us? All right, now. That shows mercy. Yes, sir. That shows mercy. And so this lesson here lets us know, in the book of Deuteronomy, he lets us know that justice and obedience is essential for Israel at that time. And it also lets us know that God has laid things there in the New Testament that we need to follow ourselves. He's so bad. He on gave. He said there were 2 commandments. Love the Lord thy God.
Right.
With all thy heart.
Right.
And thy neighbor as thyself. All these 2.
Yeah, right.
Hang all the law.
That's what he said.
If you can, and man, help me there and keep those 10.
That's right. That's right.
He made it simple for us, right?
Yes,
He said
sir.
on these 2. Love the Lord thy God. With all thy soul. And all thy heart. And all thy mind. He said you can do that. You're going to be blessed. That's what he's telling me, he said.
Right.
All thy heart, all thy mind. Love me. Who? Love the one who brought you over here.
That's it. That's it.
I don't want you to get big headed and think that it was you.
Yeah, it is, man. Right.
But it was me.
Right.
And I don't want you to accuse me. If you have problems over the promised land, don't accuse me. See those stones?
Right. Right.
Go back to them.
Right.
Read them. Everything you need is right there.
Right.
Plainly.
Right.
Don't need to interpret. Right there.
Right.
All right. You don't hear